Before the story begins, please let us know in the comments which state or city you are tuning in from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so this channel can grow and bring you even more captivating stories. Eleanor stood inside a walk-in closet the size of a luxury boutique. Before her hung a pristine, custom-tailored white silk shirt. She ran her fingers over the fabric. It felt incredibly smooth and cool to the touch. This wasn't just any shirt. It was the shirt her husband, Lucas, would wear today for the grand opening of his new corporate headquarters in downtown Manhattan. For Eleanor, today was a monumental day. It was the ultimate proof that all their dreams had finally become a reality. The door behind her opened. Lucas walked in, fresh from the shower, a towel wrapped around his waist, his hair still damp. He looked at Eleanor and smiled warmly as he saw the expensive Tom Ford suit and the silk shirt she had meticulously prepared. "You really are the best," Lucas said, his voice brimming with joy. He walked over and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You always know exactly what I like." Eleanor smiled, leaning into his warm embrace. "I just want you to look your absolute best today, Lucas. It's your big day." "It's our big day," she said as Lucas kissed her cheek. Hearing the word our, Eleanor's mind drifted back to the past. She remembered when they first started out. Their lives were so different back then. They didn't have a penthouse closet overlooking Central Park. They only had one small wooden dresser in a cramped, drafty studio apartment in Queens. Back then, there were no expensive silk shirts. Lucas only had a few cheap button-downs that Eleanor often had to stitch up when the buttons popped off. Every night after a cheap dinner, Lucas would sit at their tiny IKEA kitchen table. He would spread out his papers and passionately explain his business ideas. His eyes always burned with ambition. He talked about the massive tech and real estate empire he wanted to build. He dreamed of owning a towering skyscraper with his name on it. Eleanor always listened intently. She came from old money, a prominent, incredibly wealthy East Coast family, but she had chosen to live simply with Lucas. She believed in her husband's brilliance and drive. She silently promised herself that she would help him achieve every single one of those dreams. The opportunity arose when Eleanor's father passed away. She inherited a massive trust fund and a sprawling portfolio of assets. She could have lived a life of idle luxury, but she had other plans. She wanted to use that money as the seed capital for Lucas's business. She never told Lucas the true extent of her wealth. She simply told him she had a modest inheritance from selling a family property. That modest amount was actually tens of millions of dollars. It became the lifeblood of Lucas's company. It paid for their first office space in Brooklyn, employee salaries, and all operational costs. Over the years, Eleanor quietly injected more capital through a blind holding company without anyone knowing. Lucas's company grew exponentially. Eleanor never wanted a formal title. She didn't even want her name displayed on the public ownership documents. For her, seeing Lucas successful and happy was enough. She loved being the secret backbone of her husband's empire. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas's voice pulled Eleanor from her thoughts. "I was just remembering when we were struggling," Eleanor replied softly. "Now, this all feels like a dream." Lucas took Eleanor's face in his hands, looking deep into her eyes. "None of this would exist without you, Elle. You are the reason all of this happened. Remember that." Eleanor nodded, believing every word. Once Lucas was fully dressed and looking incredibly dashing, Eleanor handed him a neatly wrapped velvet box. "A gift for you," she said. Lucas opened it. Inside rested a rare vintage Patek Philippe watch he had wanted for years. His eyes lit up. "Honey, this is insanely expensive." "It's okay. Just for today," Eleanor smiled. "Look at the back." Lucas turned the watch over. Engraved into the metal were the words, "My true partner, forever." Lucas was silent for a moment before pulling Eleanor into a tight, emotional hug. "Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for being my wife." After breakfast, Lucas left early for the venue, citing the need to oversee final preparations. Watching his chauffeured SUV pull away, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. She had a few hours to get ready. She chose a sophisticated, understated champagne-colored Carolina Herrera gown. She didn't want to outshine her husband. Tonight, Lucas was the star. As she was doing her hair at the vanity, her iPhone chimed. It was an iMessage from an unknown number. Curious, she opened it. It was a photo. A beautiful young woman in a salon, getting her makeup done. She was wearing a striking, blood-red evening gown. Beneath the photo was a short text. The queen will be arriving at her castle soon. Eleanor frowned. Who was this woman? Who sent this? She figured it was spam or a wrong number. She didn't want a bizarre text ruining her perfect mood, so she immediately deleted it. But for some reason, a cold, unsettling feeling began to take root in her chest. The black town car carrying Eleanor pulled up to the curb of a massive, gleaming glass and steel skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. The lobby had been transformed into a lavish gala. A doorman opened her car door, and as soon as she stepped out, camera flashes blinded her. Paparazzi and business reporters were waiting behind velvet ropes, snapping photos, and shouting congratulations. Eleanor offered them a polite, practiced smile and walked up the red carpet. The party inside was pure opulence. The ceilings were impossibly high, adorned with cascading crystal chandeliers. The scent of expensive floral arrangements and high-end perfume filled the air. A string quartet played softly in the corner. The guest list was a who's who of New York's elite. Wall Street tycoons, tech billionaires, and politicians, all dressed in haute couture. Eleanor took a deep breath. This was Lucas's ultimate dream, realized. Several acquaintances came over to greet her. Good evening, Eleanor. Incredible event. Congratulations, a prominent venture capitalist said. Thank you, Richard. Please enjoy the evening, she smiled. But Eleanor felt something was off. The way people were looking at her felt different. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. The company executives who were managing the event looked noticeably nervous when they saw her. They greeted her respectfully, but their eyes darted away. The atmosphere felt incredibly awkward. Something was wrong, but she couldn't pinpoint what. She scanned the crowded room for Lucas. Finally, she spotted him holding court in the center of the hall, surrounded by influential VIPs. He looked powerful, confident, and magnetic. Eleanor felt a surge of pride and wanted to go stand by his side, but he looked so deeply engaged in conversation that she decided to wait. She took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and stood near a marble pillar, observing the room. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to a loud burst of laughter from a group nearby. In the center of the group, basking in the attention, was a woman. She was wearing a vibrant, blood-red evening gown that stood out sharply in the sea of black tuxedos and neutral dresses. Her hair and makeup were flawlessly glamorous. Eleanor squinted to get a better look at her face, and her breath hitched. It was the woman from the photo she had received that morning. Her name was Chloe. Eleanor's heart began to race. So, this woman was real, and she was here. But who was she? Why were all these important people treating her with such reverence? The cold dread in Eleanor's chest intensified. She watched as Chloe casually walked up to Lucas. With an air of absolute familiarity, Chloe reached out, adjusted Lucas's bow tie, and whispered something in his ear. Lucas smiled at her, a deeply intimate, affectionate smile. The kind of smile he usually reserved only for Eleanor. They looked like the hosts of the party, a power couple in their element. Eleanor's legs felt weak, the champagne flute in her hand trembled. Then, her eyes locked onto something resting against Chloe's collarbone. A diamond necklace. Eleanor knew that necklace intimately. It wasn't just expensive jewelry, it was a custom Harry Winston piece that had belonged to Eleanor's late mother. It was her most prized possession, kept locked in the safe at their penthouse. She had shown it to Lucas once. How on earth was it currently around the neck of another woman? In that split second, the horrifying truth crashed down on Eleanor. The awkward stares, the nervous executives, the text message, it all made sense. The ambient noise of the string quartet and the chatter faded into a ringing in her ears. All she felt was an agonizing, suffocating pain in her chest. She stared at her husband, standing intimately with his mistress, who was wearing her dead mother's diamonds. She realized this lavish gala, this towering skyscraper. It was all built for a queen. Just not her. An announcer stepped up to the main stage. With a booming voice, he called for everyone's attention. The string quartet stopped playing, and the chatter died down. The grand chandeliers dimmed, leaving a brilliant spotlight shining on the center of the stage. The mood shifted from a relaxed cocktail hour to formal anticipation. Eleanor felt her heart pounding, not with excitement, but with adrenaline. She moved slightly closer to the stage. She knew exactly how this was supposed to go. Lucas would give a brilliant speech, and at the very end, he would call her name. He would thank his wife, the woman who built him from nothing. That was the beautiful script she had played in her head all day. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the visionary behind this magnificent tower. The CEO and founder of Sterling Enterprises. Mr. Lucas Sterling. Deafening applause erupted across the grand lobby. Lucas walked out from the wings, his steps measured and exuding absolute authority. He wore the suit Eleanor had picked out. The Patek Philippe watch gleamed under the spotlight. Lucas reached the podium, smiling broadly and waving to the crowd. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here on this historic night for me and this company. His deep voice echoed through the state-of-the-art sound system. Eleanor clapped politely, her face an unreadable mask. Lucas began to recount the story of the company. He spoke of the early days of struggle, painting a picture of a man with nothing but a massive dream and relentless grit, operating out of a tiny apartment. Eleanor nodded slightly. She remembered quietly liquidating some of her trust fund's stock portfolio to pay for his first servers, telling him it was just her savings. But I didn't do it alone. Lucas continued. I was fortunate to meet brilliant people who believed in my vision. He began listing names. I want to thank Richard Hughes, my first major investor. Your trust meant everything. An older man in the front row stood and waved. Eleanor knew Richard. She had leveraged her family's connections to get Richard into that meeting room. I also want to thank my incredible executive team and every employee at Sterling Enterprises. Without your dedication, this building would still be a blueprint. More applause. Eleanor waited. Her smile was stiff, frozen in place. She knew her name was coming. Surely he saved the best for last. But Lucas kept talking. He thanked the architectural firm. He thanked the general contractors. He even thanked the Wall Street banks that provided the construction loans, even though Eleanor knew the vast majority of the equity came directly from her private holding company. The list went on, and Eleanor's name was never spoken. The warmth in her heart turned to glacial ice. She looked around. Several guests standing near her were casting uncomfortable sideways glances in her direction. They realized the glaring omission. As the legal wife, she should have been the first person he thanked. Lucas paused, took a sip of water, and looked back at the crowd. His eyes scanned the room, as if searching for someone. For a fraction of a second, his eyes met Eleanor's. She offered a small, tentative smile. Lucas immediately looked away, pretending he hadn't seen her. His gaze landed on a spot near the front of the stage. He was looking directly at Chloe, the woman in the red dress. He smiled at her. Out of all the incredible people who helped me, Lucas said, his voice dropping to a softer, more intimate register, there is one person whose role is entirely irreplaceable. Someone who has been my ultimate muse. Someone who came to me when I was on the brink of giving up, and gave me the strength to keep running. She is the very heartbeat of this empire. Eleanor felt sick. Lucas took a long pause, his eyes locked on Chloe. For that reason, I want to invite that extraordinary person up here. Chloe, darling, could you come up? Eleanor's world shattered. The applause from the crowd sounded like mocking laughter in her ears. She watched as Chloe smiled a triumphant, practiced smile and elegantly walked toward the stage stairs. The crowd parted for her. Some people clapped, likely Chloe's friends, but the majority of the high society guests simply watched in stunned, confused silence. Many turned around to stare openly at Eleanor. Eleanor felt exposed, stripped bare in front of New York's elite. She stood paralyzed, her body rigid, as she watched another woman walk up to claim the glory that was bought with Eleanor's blood, sweat, and millions. Chloe ascended the stairs with exaggerated grace, her red Vera Wang gown trailing behind her like royalty. When she reached the top, Lucas reached out, taking her hand. Chloe smiled coyly. They stood side by side in the center of the stage, bathing in the spotlight, looking for all the world like the king and queen of Manhattan. "Chloe," Lucas said softly into the microphone. "Everyone here thinks I built this company from scratch. But only you know how heavy that burden was. Only you were there to hold me when I was exhausted. You were my light in the darkest times." Standing below, Eleanor felt bile rise in her throat. Liar. It was a bold-faced lie. Eleanor was the one who massaged his shoulders at 2 a.m. Eleanor was the one who stayed awake reviewing his pitch decks. And now, her history, her sacrifices, were being stolen and credited to a mistress. The guests began to aggressively whisper. "Wait, who is she? Why is he praising her? Isn't his wife standing right over there? Oh my God. Did he just completely ignore Eleanor?" The whispers were like needles piercing her skin. She wanted to flee, to run out onto the street and disappear, but her feet were glued to the marble floor. Then, Lucas did the unthinkable. He turned to fully face Chloe, still holding her hands. "Chloe, I've realized that all this success means nothing if I can't share it with the woman I truly love," Lucas said, his eyes filled with adoration. "I refuse to hide this anymore. I want the whole world to know." In front of hundreds of VIP guests, the media, his corporate partners, and right in front of his legal wife, Lucas Sterling slowly dropped to one knee. The entire gala went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. People gasped. From his tuxedo pocket, Lucas pulled out a velvet box. He flipped it open, revealing a blindingly large, flawless diamond ring. "Chloe," Lucas said, "will you marry me? Will you be the queen of this empire, and my one and only wife?" Chloe covered her mouth with her hands, feigning absolute shock and shedding perfectly timed tears. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. At the same time, a stagehand rushed out from the wings and handed Lucas a massive, extravagant bouquet of red roses. Seeing the flowers, the last of Eleanor's composure shattered. Red roses, her favorite flowers. Lucas always bought her red roses for their anniversary, telling her they symbolized their burning, unbreakable love. And here they were, a prop in a public proposal to his mistress. The betrayal was so calculated, so cruel, so flawless. Yes. Oh my God, yes. Chloe squealed into the microphone. Applause broke out again, louder this time, mostly because people were simply too shocked to know what else to do. Camera flashes erupted like a strobe light as reporters captured the scandalous moment. Lucas slipped the ring onto Chloe's finger, stood up, and pulled her into a passionate kiss. The pain in Eleanor's chest reached its absolute zenith. Her vision blurred, and she felt like she couldn't breathe. But then, something inside her snapped. The overwhelming agony burned out in a flash, leaving behind a chilling, terrifying emptiness. Her blurred vision sharpened to diamond clarity. She no longer looked at the stage and saw the husband she loved. She saw a parasite. She didn't see a beautiful younger woman. She saw a thief. Through the chaos in her mind, one thought crystallized. This ends tonight. She was no longer the weak, humiliated victim. The pain had incinerated her patience and her love, forging a cold, unbreakable steel in her spine. The humiliation gave her absolute, terrifying purpose. With movements that were terrifyingly calm, Eleanor reached into her Chanel clutch and pulled out her phone. She opened her messages and found her chief of staff, Rachel, her most loyal confidant. She typed out a single, prearranged message designed for the absolute worst-case scenario. Execute red protocol. Now. She hit send, dropped the phone back into her bag, and took a deep breath. The real show was about to begin, and she was the director. While Lucas and Chloe were still embracing on stage to the sound of scattered applause, Eleanor began to move. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she walked. Her strides were measured, powerful, and utterly unhurried. The crowd, noticing her movement, went entirely silent. People scrambled to get out of her way, parting like the Red Sea. The only sound in the cavernous hall was the sharp, rhythmic click-clack of her Christian Louboutin stilettos striking the marble floor. Every step sounded like a ticking time bomb. She wasn't walking toward the stage. She walked straight toward the massive, lavish catering buffet running along the side of the room. The catering staff watched her approach with wide, terrified eyes. Eleanor ignored them. Her eyes scanned the beluga caviar, the Wagyu beef sliders, the towering seafood displays. Finally, she found what she was looking for at the far end of the table, near a late-night pasta station. A massive, heavy silver tureen sitting over a warming flame. Inside was a massive quantity of artisanal arrabbiata sauce, a dark, blood-red, oily marinara packed with crushed red pepper flakes and garlic. Steam rose from the surface. It was practically boiling and violently spicy. Without a second of hesitation, Eleanor grabbed the heavy silver tureen with both hands. The metal burned her palms slightly, but she didn't care. A horrified sous chef opened his mouth to stop her, but one look into Eleanor's dead, soulless eyes froze the words in his throat. Eleanor turned around. Holding the massive bowl of boiling, spicy sauce, she walked back through the crowd. Her destination was clear. The main stage. Up on the podium, Lucas and Chloe finally realized something was wrong. They broke apart. Lucas frowned in confusion as he saw his wife marching toward them carrying a catering dish. He thought the stress had caused her to lose her mind. Chloe, feeling invincible with her new ring, smirked. She thought Eleanor was going to make a pathetic, weeping scene. "Oh, honey." Chloe cooed into the microphone, making sure the whole room heard. "I think your wife wants to come offer her congratulations." Eleanor didn't slow down. She ascended the stage stairs, step by step. When she reached the top, she stood dead center, right in front of them. She looked Chloe up and down, from her perfect blowout to her red Vera Wang gown, to the stolen diamond necklace, and finally to the ring on her finger. Then, she hoisted the heavy silver tureen chest-high. Before either of them could react, Eleanor hurled the entire contents of the bowl directly at Chloe. Splash! A gallon of scalding, oily, chili-infused red sauce slammed into Chloe. It coated her face, matted her hair, and ruined her expensive gown, turning it into a dripping, greasy, horrific mess. The pungent smell of garlic and hot chili instantly filled the air. For a fraction of a second, Chloe just stood there, paralyzed by shock. Then, the boiling heat and the crushed chili flakes hit her eyes and skin. Chloe unleashed a blood-curdling, agonizing scream. It wasn't cute or delicate, it was the raw shriek of pure pain. She clawed frantically at her face, smearing her ruined makeup into the stinging tomato sauce, looking like an extra in a slasher film. "It burns. My A's. Oh my God, it burns." Before Lucas could even reach out to help his screaming mistress, Eleanor dropped the heavy silver tureen. It hit the stage floor with a deafening clang. Moving with predatory speed, Eleanor lunged forward. Her hand shot out, grabbing a fistful of Chloe's sauce-soaked hair. With a violent jerk, she yanked backward, forcing the screaming woman to her knees on the hard stage floor. "Enjoy the warm welcome, you cheap tramp," Eleanor hissed, her voice low and dripping with venom. She yanked the hair harder, pulling Chloe's head back. "Let go. It hurts. Lucas, help me." Chloe wailed, legitimately terrified. Her beautiful face was a horrifying, weeping mask of red sauce and mascara. "Eleanor, stop. Have you lost your damn mind?" Lucas finally snapped out of his shock and stepped forward, reaching out to pry Eleanor's hand away. Eleanor didn't let go of Chloe's hair. She simply turned her head and pinned Lucas with a stare so cold, so terrifyingly lethal, that he froze in his tracks. He had never seen this look in her eyes in his entire life. "Touch me," Eleanor said, her voice a deadly, quiet whisper that carried over the mic. "Touch me, and I swear to God you will be sleeping on the subway tracks tonight." The sheer menace in her voice, combined with her dead eyes, broke Lucas. He backed away, his hands raised. He realized in an instant that the docile, supportive wife he thought he could walk all over had vanished. In her place stood a ruthless, terrifying force of nature. The gala had become a silent amphitheater of shock. Chloe was sobbing on her knees, Eleanor standing over her like a conquering warlord, holding her by the hair. Lucas stood a few feet away, pale and trembling. Below them, hundreds of New York's most powerful people held their breath. Dozens of smartphones were already up, recording every second. With her free hand, Eleanor reached over to the podium and ripped the microphone from its stand. A sharp screech of feedback echoed through the room, reminding everyone that the show was far from over. Eleanor kept her grip on Chloe's hair, forcing the woman to remain kneeling at her feet as a symbol of absolute dominance. "Good evening, Manhattan," Eleanor spoke into the microphone. Her voice was steady, resonant, and chillingly calm. "I apologize for the messy opening act." The sarcasm in her tone was lethal. She paused, letting the silence hang. "Many of you are likely very confused, so allow me to properly introduce myself." Eleanor tilted her chin up. "My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am the legal sole owner of every single asset you see in this room tonight," Lucas gasped. "Eleanor, stop spouting nonsense, shut up," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. He was losing control of his narrative. Eleanor slowly turned to look at him, her eyes filled with supreme disgust. "Silence, you pathetic beggar," she commanded into the mic. She turned back to the crowd. "The man screaming over there is Lucas Sterling. His name might be plastered on the front of this skyscraper, but it means absolutely nothing. Because every square foot of this building, from the marble lobby to the boardroom in the penthouse, was bought and paid for in cash." "My cash." A loud murmur of shock rippled through the billionaire crowd. The company we are supposedly celebrating tonight, Sterling Enterprises, was founded with seed capital that came 100% from my late father's estate, Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger. "This man came to me 7 years ago with nothing but a pitch deck and empty pockets. And I, like an idiot, gave him everything. My money, my time, my trust." She stopped and looked directly at the row of reporters and their flashing cameras. "So, if you want to write a story tomorrow, write the truth. This man isn't a tech visionary, he is a puppet, a leech who sucked his wife's trust fund dry. That's a lie. She's lying. None of that is true." Lucas screamed, his face purple with rage and humiliation. Sweat was pouring down his forehead. His reputation was being systematically slaughtered in front of Wall Street's finest. Eleanor let out a dark, humorless laugh. "Are you sure you want to call me a liar?" She gave a curt nod to the back of the room. Rachel, her chief of staff, was standing by the AV booth. Rachel gave a swift nod and hit a key on her laptop. Instantly, the massive, 2-story LED screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the Sterling Enterprises logo, flickered. The logo vanished. In its place appeared high-resolution images of legal and financial documents. There were bank wire transfer receipts showing tens of millions of dollars moving from Eleanor's private accounts. There were property deeds for the skyscraper, listing Vance Holdings LLC as the sole proprietor. Finally, the corporate charter was displayed, clearly highlighting that Sterling Enterprises was a wholly owned subsidiary of Vance Holdings, a company in which Eleanor possessed 100% of the voting shares. The ballroom erupted. The evidence was irrefutable. Lucas was a fraud. Lucas stared at the 50-foot screen, his jaw slacked, his body trembling violently. He had no idea Eleanor had structured the finances this way. He thought she was just a naive trust fund girl writing checks. He was devastatingly wrong. Chloe, still kneeling on the floor, looked up at the screen through her stinging eyes. Her sobbing hitched. The billionaire tech bro she had just agreed to marry actually owned nothing. He was broke. At the absolute peak of the chaos, the massive brass doors of the lobby swung open. A team of 8 men and women in impeccably tailored suits marched in. They walked in tight formation, led by a silver-haired man carrying a leather Hermes briefcase. It was Robert Pierce, Esquire, Eleanor's lead corporate attorney, flanked by the best litigators in New York. They didn't stop at the velvet ropes. They walked straight down the center aisle, the crowd parting for them. When Robert reached the stage, he walked up the stairs, approached Eleanor, and gave a deep, respectful nod. "Everything is executed exactly to your instructions, Miss Vance," Robert said quietly. Eleanor finally released her grip on Chloe's hair, shoving the woman away so she sprawled on the sauce-covered floor. Eleanor handed the microphone to her lawyer. Robert adjusted his glasses and spoke with the cold, emotionless cadence of a corporate executioner. "Good evening. I am Robert Pierce, lead counsel for Vance Holdings and Miss Eleanor Vance. Based on irrefutable evidence of fiduciary breach and acting under the absolute authority of the primary shareholder." Robert paused, looking dead at Lucas, who looked like he was about to faint. "We hereby announce the immediate and permanent termination of Mr. Lucas Sterling as CEO of Sterling Enterprises. Effective this exact second." The lawyer's declaration hung in the air like a guillotine blade dropping. The room fell dead silent once more. Everyone stared at Lucas. The man who had been on top of the world 5 minutes ago was now a nobody. Lucas went from flushed red to chalk white. Cold sweat soaked his custom shirt. He looked at the lawyer, then at his wife, shaking his head in a daze. "No. You can't do this," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "This is my company. I built it. I did the work." Eleanor stared at him, her face carved from stone. She took the mic back. "Your work means nothing without my capital, Lucas. And the bank is officially closed." She turned slightly, looking out into the room. "Security," she called out, her voice echoing off the glass walls. Instantly, from the shadows of the lobby, 6 massive men in black tactical suits with earpieces stepped forward. They weren't the building's standard guards. They were a private, elite security detail Eleanor had hired specifically for tonight. They marched uniformly toward the stage. "Eleanor, wait. Please. Don't do this. We can go to an office, we can talk about this." Lucas panicked as the towering security guards approached. His arrogance dissolved into pathetic begging. Eleanor ignored him entirely. As 2 guards stepped onto the stage, she pointed a manicured finger at Lucas and Chloe. "Throw this trash out of my building," she ordered coldly. "Yes, ma'am," the lead guard grunted. The guards moved in, one grabbed Lucas by the bicep. "Don't touch me, get your hands off me," Lucas thrashed, trying to pull away, but the guard's grip was like an iron vice. He was instantly immobilized. Another guard approached Chloe, who was shivering on the floor. "Come on, lady. Time to go," he said, hauling her to her feet. "No. Please, Miss Vance, I'm sorry, I didn't know. He lied to me, I'm just a victim." Chloe shrieked, pointing an accusing, sauce-covered finger at Lucas. Eleanor just stared at her with profound disgust, saying nothing. Realizing there would be no mercy, Chloe went limp as the guard dragged her toward the stairs, and so began the most humiliating perp walk in New York society history. Lucas and Chloe were hauled down the stage stairs and marched down the center aisle, flanked by hundreds of elites. Every step was agonizing. Gone were the looks of admiration. Now, they were subjected to glares of contempt, mockery, and pity. Every single guest had their iPhone out, recording the disgrace. Lucas kept his head down, unable to meet the eyes of the Wall Street bankers who had been shaking his hand an hour ago. Chloe sobbed hysterically, trying to hide her sauce-smeared face with her hands, leaving red grease marks all over her skin. They were dragged past the caviar stations, past the silenced string quartet, heading straight for the revolving glass doors that led out to Fifth Avenue. When they were just 10 feet from the exit, Eleanor's voice boomed over the speakers one last time. Wait. The guards stopped immediately. Lucas and Chloe paused, a pathetic, desperate shred of hope flaring in their chests that maybe she was going to show them mercy. Eleanor looked at the head of her security detail. Before you throw them out on the street, make sure they aren't carrying anything purchased with my money. The head of security nodded. Understood, Miss Vance. What should we confiscate? Take the wallet and the phone from his pockets, Eleanor ordered. Take the designer clutch from the woman. And the jewelry. Especially that diamond necklace. She paused. Oh. And the keys to the Bentley in his pocket. The title is in my name. It was the final, devastating blow. This wasn't just an eviction, it was a total stripping of their lives. The lead guard walked up to Lucas and roughly fished the thick leather wallet and the new iPhone out of his tuxedo pockets. Lucas didn't fight back, he was entirely broken. The guard turned to Chloe. He yanked the Prada clutch from her grip. Excuse me, miss. The necklace, he demanded. Chloe shook violently as the guard unclasped the vintage Harry Winston diamonds from her neck. He also demanded the diamond earrings and the Cartier bracelets she wore. Everything went into a lockbox. Finally, the guard dug into Lucas's pocket and pulled out the Bentley keys. All clear, Miss Vance, the guard called out. Good. Eleanor replied flatly. Now, get them out of my sight. The guards shoved Lucas and Chloe through the revolving doors, locking them behind them. The two were left standing on the cold, unforgiving concrete of Fifth Avenue. No money, no phones, no IDs. Just the clothes on their backs, Chloe dripping in cold marinara sauce, facing a lifetime of public ruin. Inside the gala, Eleanor stood tall at the podium. She had won. Once the doors were locked and the two parasites were gone, Eleanor took a deep, centering breath. The room was still deadly quiet. Everyone was processing the nuclear detonation they had just witnessed. Eleanor knew she had to seize the narrative immediately. She stepped away from the podium, standing center stage, looking out at the crowd with unshakable authority. Ladies and gentlemen, she spoke into the mic, her voice no longer a furious wife, but a commanding CEO. I apologize for the disruption. Consider it a necessary piece of corporate restructuring. A few of the braver venture capitalists in the front actually chuckled. The suffocating tension in the room began to crack. Tonight obviously didn't go as planned. Eleanor continued smoothly. But I want to assure all of you, our investors, our partners, and our friends that this company is in far better hands now. Under my management, Vance Holdings will operate with integrity, transparency, and ruthless efficiency. We are going to be stronger than ever. You have my word. She offered a polite nod. Thank you all for being here. Please, enjoy the rest of the catering and have a wonderful night. The crowd erupted into applause. And this time, it was genuine. It was roaring approval. They weren't clapping for a figurehead, they were applauding a terrifyingly competent, brilliant woman who had been publicly humiliated, only to instantly annihilate her enemies and reclaim her throne. A few hours later, the gala was entirely cleared out. Eleanor didn't go back to her penthouse. Instead, she took the private elevator to the top floor of the skyscraper, walking into the massive corner office that had been designed for Lucas. Sitting behind the monolithic oak desk felt incredibly right. Rachel, her chief of staff, and the legal team were already there. Incredible execution, Rachel. Eleanor said, leaning back in the leather chair. Thank you, ma'am. I've secured all the footage from the AV team's cameras, Rachel said, handing Eleanor an iPad. The 4K video and crisp audio were perfect. Eleanor nodded. Red Protocol wasn't just about a corporate takeover. It was about controlling the media narrative. If she didn't strike first, Lucas would try to spin it. Edit it, Eleanor commanded. I don't want the raw feed. Make a crisp, 5-minute highlight reel. Start with his proposal to the mistress. Then the sauce, the speech, the the corporate documents, and end with security throwing them onto Fifth Avenue. No dramatic music, just the raw audio. Got it. What do you want the caption to be? Rachel asked. Eleanor thought for a second. Keep it factual. Grand opening of Sterling Tower. CEO proposes to Mistress in front of his wife. Wife legally reclaims her entire billion-dollar empire 60 seconds later. Rachel smirked. Perfect. I'll add the trending hashtags. 20 minutes later, the video was uploaded simultaneously to X, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. For the first 10 minutes, it was quiet. Then, the algorithm caught it. A major finance meme account retweeted it. Then, a massive pop culture gossip page posted it. Within an hour, the internet exploded. Hundreds of thousands of views turned into millions. The hashtags #Queen Eleanor, #Sauce Mistress, and #Finance Bro Fail took over the top trending spots nationwide. The comments were a bloodbath. This is the ultimate boss move, she ended him. Not the Arabiata Sacha on the Vera Wang. Dude spent his wife's millions and thought he could publicly disrespect her? Have fun at McDonald's, bro. Screenshots of Chloe's sauce-covered, crying face and Lucas's terrified expression as he was dragged away became instant, immortal memes. They became the most hated people in America overnight. Meanwhile, Eleanor was hailed as an absolute icon, a symbol of female rage and corporate dominance. The next morning, every major publication, from the Wall Street Journal to Page 6, was running the story. The Red Wedding of Wall Street. The heiress who took back her empire in 5 minutes. Eleanor sat in her office, sipping black coffee, watching the morning news shows loop the footage. She had total control. Lucas and Chloe were completely locked out of the system. No phones, no bank accounts, no way to hire a PR firm. Rachel walked in. Good morning, Miss Vance. Good Morning America is on line 1. They want an exclusive sit-down interview tomorrow. What should I tell them? Eleanor turned her chair away from the TV screen, looking at Rachel with a calm, triumphant smile. Tell them, Eleanor said softly, I'm available. When the heavy glass doors of the skyscraper locked behind them, Lucas and Chloe felt like they had been thrown onto another planet. Behind the glass, they could still faintly hear the jazz music and the party. Out here, on the damp concrete of Fifth Avenue, there was only the biting, freezing wind of an autumn night in New York. They stood shivering in shock for several minutes. Lucas stared up at the skyscraper. The lights seemed to mock him. Chloe broke the silence. The burning on her skin was temporarily overshadowed by the sheer horror of her reality. She turned to Lucas, her ruined eyes filled with pure hatred. This is your fault, she screamed, her voice cracking. You said you were a billionaire. You said this was your company. You're a fraud. You have nothing. Lucas, his ego completely shattered, snapped. My fault? You think this is my fault? He roared back. If you weren't such a greedy gold digger, constantly begging me to show you off, none of this would have happened. You ruined my life. They began screaming at each other on the sidewalk. Tourists and late-night pedestrians stopped to stare at the bizarre sight. A man in a bespoke tuxedo and a woman covered in marinara sauce screaming like lunatics outside a corporate building. Chloe tried to storm off, but suddenly realized she didn't even have her phone to call an Uber, let alone her wallet to pay for it. I'm going home, she sobbed. Home where? Lucas spat maliciously. Your Tribeca penthouse is paid for by Eleanor's holding company. They've probably already changed the locks. The crushing reality set in. They flagged down a yellow cab, but when the driver asked for an upfront payment due to the mess on Chloe's dress, they had to step back out onto the curb. The cab sped off. They had to walk. It was torturous. Chloe's expensive Louboutin heel snapped on a subway grate. Sobbing, she ripped the shoes off and walked barefoot on the grimy Manhattan pavement. Hours later, they reached Chloe's luxury high-rise. Just as Lucas predicted, her key fob flashed red. Deactivated. The night doorman, who had already seen the viral video, stepped out. "I'm sorry, folks. The property management company has explicitly banned you from the premises." They were officially homeless. With no other options, they walked all the way to Penn Station and snuck onto a train to New Jersey. Lucas had to pawn his platinum cufflinks to a shady 24-hour pawn shop just to afford a filthy, roach-infested motel room off the highway. Over the next few days, their lives became a living hell. Everywhere they went, they were recognized. Their faces were on the TVs at the local diner, on the front page of the tabloids at the newsstands, and on the phones of everyone they walked past. People pointed, laughed, and filmed them. Lucas tried to use payphones to call his old frat brothers and venture capital friends. Not a single person took his call. He was radioactive. No firm on Wall Street or in Silicon Valley would ever hire a man whose fraud and public humiliation were documented in 4K resolution. His bank accounts were frozen and drained. Chloe fared no better. The elite influencers who used to go to brunch with her blocked her on Instagram. Her social media pages, once filled with millions of followers, were now just endless feeds of people mocking her with pizza and pasta emojis. She tried to pawn the massive engagement ring Lucas had given her, only to be humiliated by the jeweler, who informed her that the ring was heavily financed, the payments were defaulting, and the store was repossessing it on the spot. Trapped in poverty and universal disgrace, the two turned on each other entirely. The passionate romance they thought they had evaporated into toxic, violent resentment. The final breaking point came 2 weeks later in their dingy motel room. They were out of money and hadn't eaten in 2 days. "I can't do this anymore," Chloe shrieked, throwing a cheap plastic cup at the wall. "You ruined my life. I was going to be a millionaire. I ruined your life. You seduced me. You made me blind. If I had just stayed with Eleanor, I'd still be a king in Manhattan." Lucas yelled back, the crushing regret finally consuming him. "Oh, so now you regret it?" Chloe laughed bitterly. "Too late. Your brilliant wife wouldn't even spit on you if you were on fire." That was it. Chloe grabbed her few remaining items in a plastic grocery bag. "I'm done. I'm leaving. I'd rather beg on the street alone than be tied to a pathetic loser like you." She slammed the door behind her. Lucas didn't try to stop her. He sat on the sagging mattress, staring into the cracked mirror on the wall. The man staring back was hollow, broken, and destitute. 6 months later, the executive suite at Vance Holdings was a portrait of calm efficiency. The sterling name had long been stripped from the skyscraper, replaced by elegant, understated silver letters reading Vance. Eleanor had completely redesigned the office. The gaudy, ostentatious tech bro decor was gone. It was now sleek, modern, and intimidatingly minimalist. Where Lucas used to keep red roses, Eleanor had fresh white orchids. Eleanor sat at the head of the boardroom table, wearing a razor-sharp navy blue tailored suit. Her hair was cut into a sleek, powerful bob. She was leading a board meeting regarding a multi-billion-dollar acquisition of a European logistics firm. She spoke effortlessly, commanding the room with raw data and strategic brilliance. The board members, mostly older Wall Street veterans, listened with absolute respect. No one dared second-guess her. In 6 months, Eleanor had proven she was far more than an heiress with a checkbook. She possessed a ruthless, brilliant business acumen. Under her direct control, Vance Holdings' profits had doubled. After the meeting adjourned, Eleanor returned to her office. She felt tired, but deeply fulfilled. She had built a fortress out of the ashes of her betrayal. She had become an icon. During her exclusive television interviews, she never once acted bitter or insulted Lucas. She simply spoke as a woman who learned the hard way about the necessity of financial independence and legal control. Her poise made her even more beloved. Rachel walked in, holding an iPad and a glossy magazine. "Good afternoon, Miss Vance, the new issue of Forbes is out." Rachel placed the magazine on the desk. Eleanor was on the cover. The headline read, "The Comeback Queen: How Eleanor Vance Turned the Ultimate Betrayal into a Billion-Dollar Empire." Eleanor smiled softly. The validation was nice, but it wasn't her driving force anymore. Her goal was building a legacy entirely her own. She hadn't thought about Lucas or Chloe in months. They felt like characters from a bad movie she had watched a long time ago. She was at peace. "Oh, by the way," Rachel added, swiping on her iPad. "A Google alert just popped up. I thought you might want to know." Rachel showed her the screen. It was an article from a local New Jersey news outlet. Former tech CEO and socialite arrested in Paramus Mall for credit card fraud. Below the headline was a bleak mugshot of Lucas and Chloe. They looked horrific. Lucas was gaunt, unshaven, and hollow-eyed. Chloe looked exhausted and aged, her hair stringy and unkempt. According to the article, they had apparently run into each other again and teamed up to run low-level stolen credit card scams just to buy basic necessities, only to be caught immediately by mall security. A pathetic, petty crime to cap off their downfall. Eleanor stared at the photo for 3 seconds. She felt no joy, no hatred, no pity, just complete apathy. They were strangers to her now. She handed the iPad back to Rachel without reading the rest of the article. "Thank you, Rachel," Eleanor said flatly. She stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window looking out over Central Park. The yellow cabs below looked like little insects. "Please prep the term sheets for the German investors at 3 p.m., Eleanor said, not looking away from the view. "And order us some lunch from that sushi place in Tribeca." "Right away, Miss Vance," Rachel said, quietly slipping out of the room. Eleanor stood there, looking out over her city. She had won. And her true victory wasn't just that the traitors got their karma, it was that their miserable existence no longer mattered to her at all. 3 years passed since the night that changed everything. Inside the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, hundreds of guests sat in rapt attention. These weren't venture capitalists. They were social workers, journalists, politicians, and survivors. On the stage stood Eleanor Vance. But she wasn't pitching a corporate merger. Tonight was the launch gala for the Vance Empowerment Foundation, a massive nonprofit she fully funded to aid victims of financial and emotional abuse. Eleanor looked radiant, wearing a sophisticated, understated emerald gown. Her eyes were warm and empathetic. This foundation was born from a very public, very painful personal experience, Eleanor began, her voice steady and powerful. "When my world collapsed, I was incredibly lucky. I had resources. I had financial leverage. I had the means to fight back and take back what was mine." She looked out across the silent ballroom. "But I know that across this country, millions of women are not that lucky. They are trapped in abusive relationships because their partners control the bank accounts. They are manipulated, drained of their worth, and left with nothing, unable to fight back. The Vance Empowerment Foundation is for them. We provide free legal counsel, emergency housing, psychological support, and microloans for women trying to restart their lives. We are going to give them the weapons they need to fight back. Just like I did." The ballroom erupted in a standing ovation. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. Eleanor was no longer just the ruthless CEO who threw marinara sauce on her rival. She was a genuine hero. She had taken her deepest wound and turned it into armor for others. After the gala, Eleanor sat in a quiet booth at the hotel bar with Rachel, sharing a glass of expensive wine. "That speech was legendary, Eleanor. Truly." Rachel smiled. "Thank you, Rachel. I couldn't have built the foundation without you," Eleanor replied. They were more than boss and employee now, they were close friends. Rachel hesitated for a moment. "By the way, I saw on the docket that Lucas was released from Rikers Island last month. White-collar fraud sentences are always too short." Eleanor took a sip of her wine, entirely unbothered. "Is that so?" She replied mildly, as if Rachel had just told her the weather forecast. "Yeah. Just thought you should know," Rachel said. Eleanor set her glass down and smiled warmly. "Rachel, that man's name means absolutely nothing to me. He is a ghost. Now, let's talk about the future. How are the new legal clinics in Chicago coming along?" The conversation shifted, and Lucas's name was never spoken again. Miles away, in a grimy, rain-soaked alley in the Bronx, Lucas walked with a heavy limp. His clothes were threadbare, a faded flannel shirt and torn jeans. Prison had aged him 2 decades. He was emaciated, his hair thinning and gray. The corporate world had permanently blacklisted him. He had to use a fake name just to get hired off the books as a dishwasher at a greasy 2-4-hour diner. It was backbreaking, humiliating labor for minimum wage, barely enough to pay for a cot in a damp basement apartment. As he trudged through the rain after a grueling 1-4-hour shift, his path took him past a busy intersection near a subway station. Looking up, he froze. Above the intersection was a massive digital billboard. It was an ad for the Vance Empowerment Foundation. Eleanor's face looked down from the screen. She was smiling a brilliant, peaceful, powerful smile. The text read, "You are not alone. Take back your power." Lucas stood in the freezing rain, staring up at the woman who used to love him. She looked like a goddess. She had achieved a level of greatness and peace he could never even comprehend. The crushing weight of his monumental stupidity finally collapsed on his chest. He hadn't just lost a billion-dollar company. He had betrayed the most brilliant, loyal woman who would have handed him the world. Tears mixed with the cold rain on his face. He realized that this was his true life sentence. Not the time he served in Rikers, but having to live every single day in the towering shadow of the incredible woman he threw away. Meanwhile, deep in a forgotten suburb of New Jersey, Chloe was living her own personal hell. She worked the graveyard shift behind the counter of a dingy 2-4-hour bodega. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. She wore an oversized polyester uniform, her face tired and devoid of makeup. She couldn't escape her past. She was universally known as the Buffalo Sauce Mistress. No modeling agency or brand would ever touch her. A group of local teenagers walked into the store at 2 a.m. to buy snacks. As they approached the register, one of the girls stopped and squinted at Chloe. "Wait. Oh my God. Are you that girl? The one who got the pasta sauce dumped on her at that billionaire party?" The teenager gasped, pulling out her phone to record. The other kids started laughing maliciously. "No way. Hey, can we get a picture? Say Arabiata?" Chloe felt her face burn with humiliation. She didn't yell, she didn't fight back. She just stared down at the linoleum floor, ringing up their Doritos while they mocked her. Her punishment was absolute. She had lost her beauty, her status, and her pride, permanently trapped in the mundane poverty she used to mock, forever a punchline to the world.